I will open our civil defence hui for us. Dear God, thank you for bringing us all together here today. Thank you for the blessings we receive every day. Please guide us today as we make decisions with and on behalf of our community. Thank you for the privilege to be able to serve our community. And God, we please ask that you keep your protective hand also on our friends who are currently experiencing flooding, and you guide them as they make decisions on behalf of the community that is in need. Amen. Amen. Okay, let's get cracking. Maybe I should get my glasses. So councillors, very welcome to our civil defence meeting. If someone asks why the Japanese flag is flying today, it's the signing of our sister city agreement in 1996. That's why our flag is flying today. Apologies. No apologies for civil defence. None received. Thank you. Declarations of interest. Let's go then to minutes. I don't see any declarations of interest. Let's go to our minutes, which is on page 4. So Heather did say to me, Heather, was it in this agenda or the next one? This one. So there are some people that were marked as present that are not present. So there was a new sheet that reported. Thank you, Councillor Seymour, for picking that up. Any other discussions or questions in regards to our minutes? None. So then yes, just I'm going to say it once, councillors, use your microphone. Councillor Seymour.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the minutes on page 6, I was just under attachment 1 and Dr. Cave's presentation, and he might give it later. A report, and this was 6 weeks some time ago, the report and draft for the Tukumara Bay community. So this was at the meeting of the 11th of May, and I just wondered when it was going to be reported to the Tukumara Bay community. It's the 3rd bullet point under attachment 1 on page 6.
Through your worship, my understanding is that report has since been shared, so it came to council. The process would then it would go and be made available to the community.
Supplementary, Madam Chair, was there a public meeting at which it was shared?
I believe so, but I will follow back up and once I've emailed the staff on that.
Thank you.
Okay, councillors, take a look at the action sheet. It's not the action sheet, it's the governance work plan, so just ignore me. We go straight on to page 13, which have the committee recommendations to civil defence. So you will see that we have 2 recommendations there. 1 recommendation there that appoints Ben Green initially as an alternate controller, and upon completion of prerequisite training to appoint Mr. Green as the group controller. Councillor Faulkner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm very happy to move this paper.
Thank you.
I know how much work goes into these roles
Seconded.
and appreciated that.
So I've got a mover in Councillor Faulkner, second in Councillor Foster. Councillor Seymour, did you want to? No, all good. Okay, councillors, if there's no more discussion, hands up, all in favour, unanimous, carried. Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Green. Oh my goodness, I need to step it up today. I need more coffee. Anyway, councillors, let's move on to our report. Mr. Green, thank you so much for it's a good to read, interesting report. I also want to welcome Ian from NEMA, who might have just stepped out of the room. There he is. Welcome, Ian. Ben, I'm going to hand over to you. You can maybe give us a quick kōrero and then we'll open up for councillors. I'm sure there'll be a few questions. Thank you.
Konnichiwa. For the most part, obviously the report as I've formatted is retrospective, but the key bits I'll just update you on, particularly is just with the staffing. So I've just, as of last night, confirmed the appointment of my welfare seat into the team. I'll just focus really on the team setup, and you just notice the change of titles, but actually equally the role and function within the team. So now, if I look back on the last 12 months, it's really reflective of a couple of things. One is the tempo and the frequency of our natural hazard events, particularly around natural hazard response and recovery actions. And equally with the pandemic running in amongst that, we're 2 years into a pandemic welfare delivery for that. What that particularly has highlighted is the critical importance of the welfare function. That hasn't been an embedded function within the team in the original setup. But clearly, certainly where complexity comes into where you're having a natural hazard event, i.e. a declared event or non-declared, running in conjunction with the regional welfare for COVID response. And that's requires really, and it's really the opportunity to bring in a practitioner for that and really nurture and strengthen the relationships with the rural sector, welfare providers, and equally the function in the national sense with NEMA. So the realignment of the roles, particularly even though it's in terms of the team that has been brought in this year, as I've mentioned, they're relatively new to sector, but bring quite a great deal of experience, particularly from their backgrounds. And the new appointee hasn't signed a contract yet, but certainly very experienced in terms of working with a health background, non-military, which is a sort of brings that private sector experience, and from the health sector. From Kumaro and Marcus, who've had the induction really short-circuited by the fact we've had to go and do the real business in terms of training. We've actually built, as I mentioned, the last group event, the capability that's actually far exceeds where we were probably in the last 12 months. And I think we're actually very well served in terms of what we've got as the building block for the team now. And equally what we're focused on when we get into our community engagement for the same there. But certainly, I think Marcus started within 1 week, had his induction. He was into the Cyclone Philly. That ended his induction, and Kumaro had the luxury of 3 weeks before he was into response mode. But no better way to see it working from the inside out. So I'll just shift on to the page 16. I have mentioned, and Councillor Pat raised this in terms of we're discussing the strategic planning workshop. So this has been locked in for the 19th to 21st of September. It has, as I've pretty much outlined there, really intent to involve a number of national planners along with our regional contribution for the same, and focus on what is the Hikurangi Magnitude 9 event. And I've got Dr. Cave in terms of the science components of that. We're looking to model that directly in the Hikurangi margin off Poverty Bay. The event in itself isn't so much a simulated exercise around response. It really looks at what the urban scenario looks like post-impact of this type and magnitude of event within which then sets the conditions for what our planning is for, certainly the recovery focus. And it's quite considerable when you appreciate the tsunami map covers the 30% of what your city is. It won't provide, it's not certainly in terms of the content of 3 days, will provide a comprehensive solution for that plan, but it actually initiates quite a few strategic work plans for that. And one of those really I'll be looking as a measure of perhaps success is to really look to inform and what it can introduce into the LTP for next year, given we don't have anything around strategic reduction for within the emergency management space for this. But this exercise will really, I'd like to think, will define really what our priorities are as a region to then see if we meet the conditions for that. I've got the recovery update here. I don't know if the Group Recovery Manager, James, is here to talk to it, but okay. And equally, Heather is part of the recovery team. So Heather, are you okay to talk to any salient points within the update? Okay. Any questions with the situation update for recovery?
Madam Chair, actually, I had a question from the finish of your other report, or the paper that's there. I just wanted to ask about the fact that you were looking at a magnitude 9 for the recovery for the exercise. I mean, that is a very substantial report, stated very substantial degree of earthquake. Is that the level at which other planning documents would occur, or would it be 8 or 7.5 or something that does happen anyway? I'm just interested in what degree of earthquake planning other areas undertake.
So if you look at the Hikurangi, obviously it turns into the Alpine Fault via Cook Strait. And with the consistent aspect we've always referred to as the 8.9, and that's where the previous Hikurangi toolbox work has been done. The existing Hikurangi, which East Coast Life at the Boundary, which is the organisation that runs the organisation and some of the science-led research, which even Dr. Murray can talk to aspects of that. We've used 8.9 really as that has always been really the magnitude that's been planned for. Dr. Cave, is anything relative to just updating and why we're sort of looking at 9?
Yes, morning everybody. At the national level, we had a discussion just recently about the ambiguity about having something called 8.9 when the material difference between that and a magnitude 9 isn't that significant. They're both devastating. And it's really just to aid the understanding in the public and the communities about this. And if you have an 8.9, why the difference between 8.9 and 9? So decision was made that it's actually better to actually be a bit more coherent and actually talk about it from a magnitude 9, which is not that much different from a scale point of view. I think going to the other part of your earlier question, recent work down in Marlborough, which doesn't have the same degree of risk as here, has identified that there is a probability of around about 26% of a Hikurangi margin rupture within the next 50 years. And how these things work technically is that the rate at which the Pacific is actually approaching and hitting Tairāwhiti is at around about 60 mils a year in the Gisborne Tairāwhiti region, and that diminishes as you go south towards Marlborough. Therefore, the potential risk is greater here, but at this stage, it's not that well defined. And so that would be a work stream that potentially would come out of this workshop.
Madam Chair.
Councillor Worsnop.
Yeah, I had a similar note and appreciate the response just with regards to the maps that people currently hold. They're obviously not going to necessarily need to update those from what I read into that answer, which is good because I would prefer it if we're not sending too many confusing messages. My question was, do we know how much funding remains in the Enhanced Task Force Green budget? How much has been used to date or earmarked? That was the first question. And my second question was just how, with regards to the action sheet item, which is in progress, do we have a new due date, given that the 12th of the 7th obviously didn't occur?
I can answer. So the Enhanced Task Force Green is run not by us. So we do not have an overview of how much is left and what's happening. It's run by Rural Support Trust and with MSD. So I can find that out. What we're currently aware of is that when money does run out, we do have the ability to go back and ask for more if we can demonstrate a need.
Just to clarify, people that have yet to be visited, because I know there's an enormous amount of work out there. If the money runs out before they're reached, potentially that doesn't necessarily mean they won't get help at all.
The money that has run out is the Mayoral Relief Fund.
Gotcha.
But the surveys have been completed. They've done 150 in the Tairāwhiti region and 100 in Wairoa. And the results of those surveys the report hasn't been made public yet, but it's anonymous and will show, I haven't seen it, so we'll show what's happening out there.
All right, thank you. And just with regards to when that report is likely to come to us.
Which report is that? So that the report coming, or the Tonkin and
Is that
Tairāwhiti
the Tonkin and
report, or
Tairāwhiti one you
the
refer?
roading report? So that's operations committee. David's got a paper and a presentation on that one. I'm not sure what section sheet.
Maybe we asked for it
Page?
here, our asked CDM.
What page are you on? Oh. All right, okay.
Do you remember at the last CDM, that's probably why it's in the action sheet, because it was raised in the last civil defence meeting, and we were told that it was coming back to this committee, even though to my mind, it doesn't necessarily live here.
Yeah, so that was, sorry, through your worship, I thought we were in the other report, recovery report. So on the action sheet, that item was the one that I signalled that would not be making it to this committee at this time, and that will be going to operations one.
Yes.
So it just has not been updated in the commentary, so you will receive it
Next week.
like this week. in
Next
your
week is
pack.
operations.
Yes.
Councillor Faulkner. Oh, sorry, Nadine, you want to say
Also,
something?
just for your interest in terms of the mayoral relief fund, is Ms. Con had pointed out that that funding had been spent. Just so you know that we've paid out 50,000 to date. We've also approved another 52,000. So we're waiting for the account details on that. $75,000 has also been ring fenced for applications that have some further information and quotes to come, and another 30,000 is for ring fence for properties that need silt removal. So there's been quite a lot of work.
Councillor Faulkner, thank you, and then Councillor Dowsing.
Thank you. Probably a question for Mr. Green. I have to admit to a wee bit of frustration around the satellite imagery, given that when these events first occurred, even the first events, within the first 2 or 3 days, we were offered the service, and yet I read in the update that we still don't have access to it.
I'll defer to Dr. Cave, who's in managing that part.
Yes, we were really pushing for it, but obviously it did rely on external funding. And when we got the price for the high resolution imagery, we were talking about $180,000+. But in actual fact, the satellite imagery has been flown. And what we did in the meantime was we engaged GNS to use lower resolution data from Sentinel to assess in a more general sense, so we can narrow down the areas where we could really then focus. We've received a report on that, and it's been circulated through to some of our technical people internally to provide comment, and they've provided also a shapefile so we can put it up on our GIS so we can actually sort of assess it further. Now, 1/3 of the area that we were interested in is now at relatively high resolution up on Google Earth. So we're actually already starting to utilize that to assess it. And the anticipation is that the other 2 strips either side of that will become available on Google Earth within the next month. So by procrastinating, we'd obviously saved ourselves quite a bit of money, but we did push pretty hard with some central government agencies to get funding, but we were not successful.
Dowsing and then Seymour, thank you.
Thank you. Just on page 17, number 14, review of arrows and the flood modelling, which is the flood modelling tool which we use. Is there, how much consideration has to go into, I guess, what was an emerging issue, and now is the status quo of sort of the mobilisation of wood waste into our flood modelling, and how does that get picked up? Because it obviously is by catchment and by activity and by timing of harvest, and there's a great deal of complexity that goes into that, but those mobile dams are causing a lot of issue.
Through you, Chair. If I can answer that, it comes out of our stormwater team. So it sits across a couple of areas in council. And a lot of it is becoming on muscle memory around how different catchments are responding in different events as land use changes as well. What we want to do is tweak arrows so that we can actually start to take some of those land use considerations are the biggest changes. Yes, debris dams are an issue for us. However, arrows looks at a river's response over time to a rainfall event. The biggest thing we're noticing is as forests are being harvested, the response rate of rivers is becoming a lot faster than what it's been in previous events. The Tairāwhiti in the last event, for example, was responding far quicker than we've ever seen because, and you know, we're now talking of a 0.5 metre gain in water level within half an hour. That was unheard of in the Tairāwhiti 3-4 years ago. So it's using some of the memory that we're getting from the events that are happening and then updating arrows as those catchments operate differently. The other big one's obviously the Waipawa with the changes that we've made to the stock banks there, actually how much that can handle and how it's responding, as well as drainage and things changes across the network. So it is around the bigger catchment and the debris dams we can't plan for, but it is very much around water volume in and out and how fast the rivers come up and down. So the clearer land or the harvested land is essentially creating a bigger funnel. Forested land, as we wait for trees to re-establish, definitely speeds it up, as do tile drains on the Poverty Bay flats. Water's moving faster than it has previously, all of those things. So those will need to be taken into account for arrows going forward.
Councillor Seymour.
Thank you. This is the question with respect to the report table today around the 8 properties red stickered in Tukumara Bay. This seems to be clear that it refers to those that may be lifting in order to clear dirt or silt. Is it a different group of properties that are being lifted permanently, which I understand Ngāti have a contract for the lifting? So is it 2 batches of properties? It's page 8 of 9 under the photograph, under building services. And I just wondered how many are red stickered, and we're waiving consent fees, which is great. May need lifting. We should probably know by now. I suspect we do. But are we talking, is there another set of properties that are going to be lifted permanently with the fund that's been made available to Ngāti?
We're still, through you, Your Worship, we're still waiting on some flood modelling. Murray might like to speak to this, which is proving problematic. And that's to show what the flow of water is going to be through where those stick properties are. Murray, do you want to speak to it further, please?
Well, we received the draft report from Tonkin and Taylor, and the team that's reviewing it met yesterday to discuss that and identified areas where we want clarification on some points and expansion on other points. And one of the key issues is whether or not just raising the floor plate of a property is enough from a hazard risk assessment point of view, because in a flood event we also have the issue of flow velocity. So if it's over and above a certain flow, is actually the level of risk unacceptable? And so that's another area that we need consideration. We also need to consider that for the properties in Arthur Street, what mitigations we can put in for there may actually have another effect on the school and properties on the other road. So that also needs quite careful consideration. We plan to go back to Tonkin and Taylor with our comments by close of business tomorrow, once we've compiled all those comments and had internal feedback, people happy with what we're saying. And then we'll no doubt have a meeting with them just to elaborate what the next steps are, so we can get that report finalised and get some push that through to decision making.
Thank you. So are they can I just ask again, currently the 8 properties which this refers to, is that the total properties that are red stickers? So they will include those that might be needing to be lifted as well as those that are being lifted just to remove silt. We haven't got 8 plus 6 is what I'm really asking.
Not all of those properties are affected by flooding. We have some that are affected by landslide risk as well.
Yeah.
And so, but there's that number is the number for Tokomaru Bay.
Thank you. And I mean, through the chair, I mean, we probably all saw the newspaper article in the paper in the last few days. So it is of concern, the length of time these things take, but we know it takes a long time. Thank you. So it'll hopefully we'll get some progress for the community.
Nadine.
Just sorry, councillor Seymour, just in response to that, I don't think we've got full visibility over those whānau houses that are impacted in terms of whether they're the ones that also require in Arthur Street. So that's something that will follow up with TBK. We can share that information across groups. And just in response also in terms of the report from last year that Dr. Cave prepared that was circulated to the Tokomaru Bay community at the hui that the Rural Support Trust facilitated staff attended.
Thank you. Thanks,
you.
Madam Chair.
Any other questions of Mr. Green? Councillor Burdett.
Thank you. Further to that, Madam Chair, I've had a number of phone calls and I yesterday visited Makarika Valley, people out there concerned. I just want to know, given that we're the lead agency and we did red sticker those properties, how much influence do we have with insurance and with those others, Earthquake Commission, in getting things done? How much actual influence do we have? Can we put any pressure on? That seems to be the concern for most, to get things done.
I'll answer in part. Equally, I'll get Dr. Cave, and equally it just indicates particularly where we were I'll just go back to November last year. So the system in place last year had EQC dealing directly with the affected household or property. And really their remit there was the 8 metres within the sort of house area. What's changed in terms of that process now is that the insurers delegated the responsibility on behalf of EQC. So EQC doesn't deal directly with that. Now, we're talking about obviously whānau up the coast in terms of impact. Now, I'd actually go back to November last year. We still have a number of properties in Gisborne here that are still uninhabitable. And that's certainly going into almost the 12-month mark as the next month for some. So the pressure, look, and it's a constant conversation with Sarah Knox as the insurance council and the recovery team, what Heather and James have had been obviously dealing with, and a fair amount of obviously the angst is obviously around the insurance component. So that's something we certainly take people into that stream. It's not, we're obviously a third party in that regard. We're not directly advocating on behalf of or leading that process. It's an insurer to insuree in that sense there. So I guess from a recovery point of view, and it's probably for Heather and the team, is really being able to sort of continue that advocacy in terms of the collective, because that certainly is really where we're not, I guess, seeing that come back, and newspaper articles in particular, where you're getting the whānau really venting their frustration. So Heather, and equally Dr. Cave, if there's anything further to that, I mean, our hands are probably tied in terms of where we are in the process for that.
Thank you for that.
Through you, Your Worship, we have acknowledged that the new model is problematic, and James, I am aware, has contacted Sarah Knox directly, and I've spoken to Ian this morning, who will talk about it at a national level.
Thank you. Councillor Foster.
Yeah, just one question. Just with all the remediation and the work that's going to be required to get these houses up to speed, is there the labour to be able to accommodate all this? I mean, obviously there's a lot of work to be done, and we're suffering from a shortage of labour even for local build around here. So to do this remedial work up the coast, do we have the labour capacity to get it all done?
I can't answer that. It's a good question. I mean, we're about to see a significant number of buildings in terms of residential builds coming in. And as I mentioned, particularly with the engineering components for the houses in town here, that require heavy engineering solutions as part of that. That's certainly the resource isn't something we're blessed with an abundance of. And I think that's the challenge in terms of the whole recovery space.
Councillor Robinson and then Councillor Horsnell.
Can I just clarify the solution in the report on the lifting of the buildings? We've got control and ownership of that. We're liaising for those homeowners so they are not individually having to carry the stress and responsibility of working out at what point their home may be still viable or not, right? We're carrying that brief for them.
There's complexity and it's probably beyond my remit to answer that, but particularly with as Heather mentioned, with within particularly the Tukumari catchment, I take you specifically looking at that one, given that's the topical one at present. That's in terms of the model flow going through that catchment, and as Dave Wilson indicated, really with the modifications in terms of what's relating in terms of what's happening in that flow that's going into the area there. The research component, I guess, is what we are involved in. The other aspects there in terms of insurance, but look, that's something we're not directly mandating or leading.
We're managing the report from Tompkins Taylor, right? And that's, as Murray said, had some potentials that are yet to be determined. That report would, in relation to the houses where the flow goes through, that's going to be determinative of some pathways for some of those whānau. And then what we pass over, we say, here's the status. Good luck.
Mr. Wilson.
So through your worship, we've been working with the Tonkin and Taylor report, but then also our teams have been out assessing where the new flood level heights should be. That's not a small undertaking for us to do that. So we've been working with the building team and the engineers have been out and done their assessments. We very much want to wait for the Tonkin and Taylor report to make sure that our internal workings are right. And then we will be communicating what that looks like through the building process as to where those flood levels now sit. We have worked with a number of people who aren't going to wait for those and are going to choose to build on their own. And we have talked to them about some heights that would be appropriate for them to work within. So we have been contacting people and working through that. But a lot of this sits with their insurers, and a lot of this is also building liabilities that we need to be careful of for council as well.
Any more questions? Queries? Last question, Councillor Horsnell. Thank you.
Just a quick one. Just noting that we've made quite a large investment in vegetation clearance, in particular in Tukumaru, and obviously the community previously had expressed a desire to get rid of a lot of the riverbank bamboo, which they'll be very happy to see gone. Noting that this was probably, it doesn't help when the water's trying to move quickly if there's a lot of vegetation. What have we got planned to prevent that all just regrowing and exactly the same thing that was there before? Are we committed in some way to maintaining that, or is the community responsible, the landowner responsible? How do we make sure that that investment is not wasted?
Through you, your worship, this is part of the reports that need to come back to council as part of the long-term plan considerations, and the Tonkin and Taylor report will be helping us with assessments of this. We don't have a drainage district for Tukumari Bay. We do not have a plan. We do not have funding for a lot of these awa at the moment. We're undertaking the works for the Mangahoini at the moment, where we've spent a considerable amount of work and money redoing the groins and a lot of the stop bank work through there. However, we need to come back to you to discuss what an ongoing plan looks like, because we definitely need to make sure that we've got an independent review of that work to give you confidence in what we're recommending, because there will be rating impacts for our community as part of that as well.
Can I have a
last question, Councillor Seymour?
Thank you. Really, thank you very much to Mr. Wilson and to Councillor Worsnop for the question, because it does make, this is a hypothetical one going forward. Is it time that this council thought about actually having drainage plans for our community? If you think about, a number of us went to Tairāwhiti a few weeks ago, and many years ago we did have drainage plans for primary drains and streams and collected a rate relative to the work that might need to happen in that particular area. And it seems to me that we should put it on the discussion list at least when we do our TRMP, because it's something that's appearing time and time again, is hugely expensive. I mean, the TRI was really deep for those who weren't able to go. It is, we all think of it, know it, as a relatively small stream that doesn't carry a lot of water. Well, the banks are very deep. The debris is in the bottom of it, and it's going to be really expensive to clear. So maybe we should just flag, we need to plan for that in the future, Madam Chair.
Thank you for that, Councillor Seymour. Mr. Green, thank you so much for your report. It is always interesting reading, and like you said, it's retrospective, so we've been through it, but I do want to acknowledge your team as well for the work you do. What else are we covering in your report that we haven't yet? What else do you want to just bring to the fore?
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship, for the comments there. Just a couple of ones which just informs progress, I guess. The Emergency Coordination Centre, that's obviously proceeded through the public consultation, just catching up with the project manager before the hui today. That's really 4 things are going to plan with the consent process. We'll be looking to have that underway in September.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
We all know from different hats we wear that procurement issues and cost overruns are an issue. How's it looking for budget, given the delays to date on it?
Talking to the project manager this morning, the quantifying really the bits we've had to engineer some of the aspects of foundation, not significant, but certainly that's the aspect of getting everything put forward to enter into the building consent process. So that's where we're at the moment in terms of budget, but be fair to say that within the $1 million, it's certainly going to be north of that figure.
At this point, do we have any indication how north and what steps are we taking? Mr. Wilson shaking his head vigorously. What steps are we taking to ensure we stay as far south of the north?
Through your worship, Ben and I are working with the architect and the foundations for what that's going to look like. We'll report back once we know where that sits. The cost comes around fit out. The chief executive's already told me we're carrying our desks down there. We're not buying new ones. So part of that very much is about what that fit out costs look like, and we'll bring that back to you once we know what that figure looks like.
Okay, councillors, anything else? Absolutely. No, and the floor is yours, Mr. Green. You lead us.
Yes, so look, I've
Because we're
got
just going through your report.
Ian Wilson from NEMA here, so I'll just get Ian to run through the key points really in terms of what he's presented there.
Thank you, Ian.
Morena koutou, thank you, Your Worship. At the last meeting, you asked me to pass on the thanks to the Minister for delaying the feedback on the trifecta. That was passed on and greatly received by the Minister, so thank you for that. Just on that, it is still proceeding and the bill will go to government in November. However, we've now started looking at the guide to the plan, and that's I guess the working section of the bill. It outlines the roles and functions of each agency, where they sit, what they're going to do, and how they commit to that. Now we have 11 projects working under that, and we're working with the groups to make sure that we get this correct, and we have subject matter experts from each group working with us. We don't anticipate it will be a great impact on the groups, but we will obviously have Zoom meetings and make sure that it's correct. Also on that, we do have a new minister now, Minister Kieran McNulty. We don't envisage any change to Minister Allen's program and progress. He is committed to it as well. And we do thank Minister Allen for her work and her dedication to CDM. Our monitoring and response unit went active on the 24th of July. That's a 24/7 agency we have sitting within the office. We don't envisage any impact on the groups, apart from the fact that we'll now get out warnings and notifications and emergency mobile alerts to the sector a lot quicker. The point of contact will still remain for the groups through the REMAs myself. So we'll keep in contact with the groups and keep that, I guess, in line and aware of what's going on. The other aspect of working with the groups, we've developed a group charter. Now, for a long time, we've had a mismatch, I guess, of NEMA's work program and group work programs. Sometimes they've actually been counterproductive. So we've been working with the groups to ensure that we now have a joint work program, a joint understanding of where we're going, what we're doing, and how we can use all those resources to ensure that, one, NEMA's marching in the right direction, and two, the groups are also marching in the right direction, and we can balance and support each other. just on the work, and Ben's raised it quite well in respect of certainly for Tairāwhiti, you've had 5-6 events in the last 2 years. Now that's a heavy workload on a group, and it is starting to impact on the well-being and the stress of staff, not only in this group but throughout New Zealand. There's been a lot of response with respect to COVID, and I guess also other events as well. With that in mind, we're working with all the group managers and looking at a wellness strategy of how we can manage that, how we can manage the sector burnout, and how we can actually keep our good staff within the sector. The group's actually working with an organisation called Hummingly to produce a toolkit so that we can actually address this sort of staff stress, staff burnout, and staff wellbeing. We're in the process of actually just developing that at the moment. The final one, floods, as you're aware, I guess Tairāwhiti will be our lead in this aspect, are our major risk in New Zealand. And we've developed 2 new campaigns to supplement groups. And there's a lot of media that component that the groups can actually use, both in the social, the written, and the radio. The first one is Get the Flood Out. It's a very subtle play on the initials of those words. It's a readiness campaign. It's asking people to look at what's there, discourage them, I guess, from entering waters. And it's actually targeted at the high risk elements of people that go and play in those waters. So it's a very new campaign. It's just been rolled out. The next campaign that sits right behind it, though, is quite a hard hitting campaign, and it's The Floodwaters Are Deep. The wording on that one is quite strong and severe, and it's looking at where the floodwaters have already hit and advising people not to go in there and stay out. So it's a more hard-hitting impact campaign that'll be used actually once the floodwaters are there. But those 2 campaigns are now available for the groups to use, and there's a lot of resources behind, and we're happy to support. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that, Ian. Any questions? Councillor Walsall.
Just on the campaign messaging, because I know quite often campaigns are very successful. And in our region, a lot of our rescuers tend to be members of the public. Have we considered how advising people not to go into floodwaters might impact on people helping other people? I mean, obviously doing it just because it's fun is not a great idea, but doing it when somebody needs help is sometimes necessary. Is that a component of that messaging?
There is a component built into that campaign, yes, around the messaging of volunteers and rescuers. Definitely. That is a...
Councillor Burnett, is your hand up or you're just waving out? Only waving out. Okay, Mr. Green.
Yes, I'll just draw your attention to paragraph 29, so page 19, and I'll just talk briefly to the tangata whenua engagement. Now, within the rewrite that's currently going through of the civil defence legislation, emergency management legislation, I should say, and the aspects that particularly are looking to incorporate the iwi Māori component within the sector. Equally, I've mentioned previously that's not something I don't think we're overly deficient of, but certainly we continue to work and strive to work very hard in terms of how we seek to embed that combined aspect of the iwi partnership into the sector here. The project, I will mention those that the Marae Resilience and Emergency Project is underway of just on behalf of Te Puni Kōkiri and the Toitu grouping lead that project as well, inclusive of the council. So we've been through, that's seen the first purchase of the initial consignment containers that'll be distributed across the region. That's part of phase 1 of a phase 3 overall project with Te Puni Kōkiri's funding $4 million within there. The other aspect also is just with particularly with the review of the Act and the trifecta program as it's referred to, and the relationship with the group plan is equally, that'll be initiating. We did commence that last year, but really with the review of the Act and the timeline for that, which has been deferred, obviously to go hand in glove with the development of our group plan. So we're looking to initiate and align that as a parallel work stream, but it's obviously integrated within the context of the Act being taken through its review process. And equally, just in terms of my final point, in terms of the community, and once again, as much as we deal with the developing and coordinating the response and aspects of recovery there, I'd certainly acknowledge the work of our volunteer group. And having been up to Tairāwhiti and Wharikaihaka, meeting with groups up there yesterday, you take into account really the resilience. I guess we probably use that as perhaps a cliche at times, but equally, and I appreciate the meeting in Tukumari Bay tonight. It really just indicates the event in itself may be hours long, but the aspect of recovery and the impact is obviously months. And equally within town here, we don't tend to hear or see too much around what's happened up Hill Road or Clifford Street with really householders who've yet, and they're actually probably nowhere near getting to get back in their house. So we've got probably subclinical in terms of media coverage for some, but certainly we're seeing the impact of those areas out there. There's, I guess, the community downstream impact and trauma for that. So, and my final point is for those retiring this year, thank you for your service to the community. Look forward to that leadership still being tapped into, really, when you are part of your communities again in terms of this kaupapa. And for those that are seeking re-election, good luck.
Thank you for that, Mr. Green. Any more questions, any other aspects you want us to discuss?
I'll probably take most as read. With this, obviously, I will acknowledge the appointment of Murray across into my team. It says 0.3 FTE, really, I think 0.3 is quite a stretchy sort of figure when I'm dealing with Dr. Cave there, but the ability particularly to have, a real hazards, an expert within the team is actually quite a key driver within our function. And I think really as a community, we're well served with the work that Dr. Cave and what we're about to embark on as a regional, but equally a nationally significant workshop will actually be, I think, probably a good platform for other regions in terms of what we're about to do with the Hikarangi magnitude 9 work there. So, yeah, it's always a fair bit happening, but I guess we've been relatively dodging a bullet in that sense for the last 3 weeks in terms of what's happening around the country. We don't need any more rain than a storm, to be honest, to amplify what we've already got a significant damage in our roading networks in particular out there. So
thank you for that. And this is a lovely, the partnership charter is really beautiful how you've put it together and how you work nationally. I really want to commend you. When I read through that, I thought, oh, we're in safe hands. Thank you for that. Any more? Councillor Foster.
Thank you. Yeah, with I've read here there's like a national accreditation for new volunteers and civil defence workers that are coming on stream, and we're seeing a lot of the older volunteers retiring now. And that have we got a good uptake in the new volunteers and the accreditation that they're required to, and the information they're required to have to be a good volunteer? Is there a good uptake in that around our region?
Having run the sessions yesterday, we actually got the key focus for us. We need within the regional construct. I mean, Community Link has been the enduring aspect of Bowler. To be honest, a lot of people have there from the inception of that. So succession and really bringing in, the sort of rangatahi focus is actually a key component of really what our readiness and outreach program is based on. And equally leveraging technology. So we've actually brought in a key component of our community engagement is that we've actually now got the platform we can connect them directly into the ability to run them with a response. Now that's, I can probably only best describe that as previously we've run it with a radio or cell phone, connecting individually on an ad hoc basis. We've got the capacity now to bring any part of the region that's been impacted with its multiple areas. And in the March-April event, there was all areas where we had all of our key leads and teams present there. So what that equally allows us to do is the ability to passage in and gather information in a very time-sensitive manner where we need to do that. And equally, because it's a technology component, we actually probably need those that are quite proficient with the young person that drives a computer, but we actually are seeing that. It was great yesterday, and it's I think that's probably the refresh along with the focus, which for us is operational readiness and developing the community building blocks. So the modular, the training we reflect is really how we leverage that in terms of running a responsive.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Green, and thank you, Ian, also for the support we received from NEMA. Much appreciated. Do I have a mover for our report? Councillor Faulkner, thank you, and Councillor Petit, all in favour, contrary, carried. Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr.